This is my problem with Superman. I don't want another damn Superman movie where he's in Metropolis with Lois. Like, how many times have we had Luthor as the villain? I know Gunn is looking at changing things up and he's using different source material, but that story's been told so many times. And Superman has so many different other stories to tell. Go tell them. Just make it good.
I think the problem with that is, and I get what you mean, and that's for people like us that know the source material, but the other 95% of the mass audience, when they go to sell a ticket, I think that's where it becomes a problem. Like, we want to see Superman off Earth, but if you start doing people like some of the other ones, you're going to run into some excuse where.
But Vaughn, this gets back to what Court was saying earlier. It's us. It's our fault. It's the audience's fault, right? And this is what I'm getting at. It's kind of like McDonald's. There's some people that will only have a Big Mac. They won't have a Big Mac with two, there's no plugging McDonald's, but they're not going to have it with like a double Big Mac, right? They want the same meal all the time. And that's fine, but you can go watch those movies, right? Like, if you don't like Rey, then just go watch Return of the Jedi, A New Hope, whatever. The stories, these characters have to change. They have to evolve, right? And if you have a character that's been around for 50 plus, 70 plus years in certain cases, if you spend 1 minute giving me Batman's origin in a film, what are you doing? Everybody knows that origin because it's part of canon. It's like it's part of the cultural zeitgeist. You know, kid, he's on a rocket, planet blows up. You find him in a cornfield. He gets raised up, superpowers. That archetype is so strong that you can get the boys out of that. What's the one, Court? I can't remember. It was a great film where it's set up the same way, where the kid had a towel as a cape, and he was actually and he's actually was like a menace. He was an actual terror. I can't remember the name of it, but it was a smaller,
like Brightburn or something
like that. So that archetype, no one's going to look at that movie and go, "Oh, that's an interesting story about a superpowered child." It's Superman. It's a Superman allegory. Right?
Yeah, it's a Superman allegory. But the thing, I think what happens with that is, I think going back to what Court was saying, is that that's a low budget outside of the corporate structure, so they could take that risk. Brightburn, that's fine. It's made probably underneath $100 million budget, probably if that, right? So they could take that risk. But when you get into like corporate Disneys and MGMs and DCs and stuff, I think a lot of the stuff is getting pushed by the corporate heads as well too, where they're not willing to take that risk. Like, I haven't seen a Batgirl movie yet. They were willing to shelf it. That Batgirl movie could be really bad, but it's an original story. But they were betting on the fact that nobody knows Batgirl. What's going to get people through the door? It was made for TV. We're not going to see a return on our investment. So let's take a $60 million write down on it and call it a loss and just shelve it, because that's not a guarantee anymore, right? Avengers, Superman, Batman, those are guarantees.
But Superman, not with the same story. Like, because here's the thing, right? Say what you want about Bond. Yeah, some of the missions are kind of the same, and you have certain points that hit. But if he's always going to be skiing in a movie, if he has 20 skiing scenes in 20 consecutive movies, it's boring. You don't want to see that. That's all I'm getting at. So tell the Superman stories, just tell a different one. Right.
So here's where I'm going to annoy a lot of your fans, and you as well. You don't need to tell those Bond stories. You don't need to tell those Superman stories. You can, as you said, you can use them as allegories, what have you. But here is the problem. You made the point of, as a writer, if you tell a good story, that's all that matters. People will love a good story. And I agree, people will love a good story. The problem is, you're forgetting we're talking about titles that have huge corporate interest. And the reason why so many different Superman stories to tell is because there's been 6,000 Superman comics over the years. You both, as men who are within the comic industry, know how hard it is to get one comic out. You've probably read some really great stories where you're like, oh, this would be a wonderful series. People would love it. And you find it in a dustbin somewhere or one of those dollar bin comics. Because at the end of the day, you have been fed Superman for years. You have been fed James Bond, Spider-Man for years. My kids know Spider-Man and they can tell you all about Spider-Man, and they're really young. Why? Because they have been fed from birth when they turn on TV, Spider-Man, Spider-Man, Spider-Man. So you were not giving leeway for other things to come in. And then also, if you are going to say, let's tell this story that people don't know, but it's a really good story, or we can make 200 million easily by just coming out with a new Batman movie. They're going to come up with that new Batman movie, right? As I say, when you reach a certain level of success, the amount of risk you take reduces. It could any industry. We're talking about football earlier, and how our teams got smoked during wild card weekend. But if you look at your Cowboys and how they're constructed, they will always garner a certain amount of talents because of the wealth of fame, the knowledge. They're never going to be struggling like the Browns or
Wait. I'll tell you straight right now, as a Cowboy fan,
America's team.
That whatever. They you know what though? They're not that different from what we're talking about.
Exactly.
Right? You want to put the same like it's the definition of insanity, where you do the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different result, right? So if you're a Cowboy fan and you have, good Lord, 3 decades of the same thing, right? Over and over. But because they're a big brand, people will flock to it. Then you have the Stephen A. Smiths, not to go too into sports, who every year get to laugh with their Cowboy Stetson hat on because Jerry Jones.
I saw the highlight.
Right? Has totally.
Wait till you hear the song. If you haven't heard the song, Google that, or on YouTube.
Google the song.
Look up the Stephen A. Cowboy song.
Right, but as a Cowboy fan, I knew what was going to happen, so I'm not even disappointed. I'm just like, I'm now indifferent, and that's kind of what I'm getting at, where it's that you can have those brands, but change the product. Make the product good. I'm not saying that you have to have another Bond movie, but if those are the things that drive the engine, and we all know that they are, that so you can have those smaller films, right? Just like how Batman allows you to have another Watchmen type series in the comic book sphere. That's fine. But you don't have to tell the same story and tell it badly. That's all I'm getting at. Because I think we're arguing the same things, just slightly different. Slightly different.
Yes, and I get that, but at the same time, I disagree with the fact that you need the Cowboys, or heck, let's keep it in Canada. You need the Maple Leafs to sell out.
They're the same thing. What's that show? The Office? It's the same thing.
Exactly. But you don't. The fact that you need them to keep everything else afloat is the problem. Because if you need them, then you need that standard cookie cutter thing, and that standard cookie cutter thing needs to be the most popular because it gains the most revenue. Then you might get a smaller team. You might get a Florida market team or a Nashville team, what have you. And those teams might rise up and do well. But at the end of the day, you need your Cowboys. You need it. So you need your Spider-Mans. You need your Supermans, according to these studios. That is not necessarily good business. But then by having you put so much emphasis on the quote unquote brand, we are seeing now in film less and less smaller films getting shots at theaters, because the way how everyone's competing with streaming, what have you, you can go to a local theater and your options are Aquaman, Blue Beetle, Shazam, and maybe Killers of the Flower Moon, depending on where you are. You might get maybe some
Well-
areas might get Godzilla -1, but even that is again a known brand, right? Like we are in the age of brand must be king, and that's hurting everything.